The crystal glasses chimed softly as guests lifted their champagne flutes in a toast. 50 years of marriage. Half a century of shared moments, dreams, and life lived side by side. The golden accents shimmered beneath the chandeliers in the lakeside restaurant, creating a warm glow that matched the occasion. As friends and family gathered around, I adjusted the silk of my dress, the shade of vintage champagne, and watched Walter, my husband of 5 decades, clear his throat to begin his speech. Before we dive back in, let us know where you're tuning in from. If this story resonates with you, don't forget to hit that subscribe button because tomorrow, I've got something even more special lined up just for you. Margaret Cooper's life has always revolved around family, sacrifice, and support, especially when it came to her husband, Walter. For 50 years, she dedicated herself to his career, his needs, and the family they created together. But recently, things have shifted in ways she could never have imagined. The dissolution of her marriage to Walter wasn't just about legal papers or financial settlements. It was about her identity. As the process of their divorce drags on, a new version of Margaret begins to emerge. One who isn't defined by her role as wife and mother, but as a woman with her own dreams, voice, and ambitions. The unraveling starts with a phone call from her son, James. The conversation begins innocuously enough, with James mentioning that Walter has been drinking again. But the tone shifts quickly when James informs her that Walter has been telling people Margaret is trying to ruin him professionally. James, who's always been protective of his mother, is clearly frustrated. "I think he wanted me to talk some sense into you," he says, explaining that Walter is using their children to paint Margaret as the villain in their divorce. Margaret presses her fingers to her temple, feeling a headache forming as the weight of the situation crashes down on her. She had long suspected that Walter, ever the manipulator, would try to control the narrative of their breakup. His professional success and the reputation he had built over the years meant everything to him, and it seemed that, as usual, he was willing to reshape reality to serve his own interests. His legal practice had always been about controlling the narrative, bending the truth to benefit his clients, and now he was doing the same thing to her. Walter had always been the center of their lives, and now, despite everything that had happened, he was still trying to dictate the terms of their reality. After she reassures James that everything is fine, Margaret ends the call and leans against the wall. She closes her eyes, feeling a deep frustration that Walter's game of manipulation is not only continuing but escalating. The divorce isn't just about assets or finances anymore. It's about his attempt to rewrite history and make her the villain. Her frustration intensifies as she wonders how she let things go on for so long, always supporting his dreams while suppressing her own. Now, however, with the divorce proceedings in full swing, she is beginning to reclaim her voice, and it's terrifying in the best way. Margaret decides to attend the writing group she's been a part of for the past few months. It's her only space where she feels like herself, where she can focus on something outside of Walter's shadow. The group meets every Thursday evening at the local library. Despite everything swirling around her, she's eager to get back to her writing. She arrives late but is quickly caught up in the discussions of her fellow writers. Eleanor, a seasoned and supportive member of the group, immediately picks up on Margaret's distress. She gently asks if everything is okay, but Margaret, unwilling to burden her fellow writers with her personal problems, simply nods and forces herself to focus on the meeting. After the session ends, Diane, one of the group members, approaches Margaret with a business card in hand. "I meant what I said about your story," Diane says, offering her help. "If you're serious about revising it, I have a friend who's an editor at Little Harbor Press. If you want, I could connect you with her." Margaret feels a wave of warmth at the generosity of the offer, a reminder that there's more to her life than the mess Walter has made of everything. She takes the card, silently moved by Diane's kindness. She promises to think about it, tucking the card into her pocket as she walks out of the library into the cool evening air. As she walks to the parking lot, Eleanor links her arm through Margaret's. They walk in comfortable silence for a while before Eleanor speaks up. "So, what did you think? Did you enjoy the meeting?" Margaret's response is automatic. They're all so talented, and they take their writing seriously. Eleanor's sharp gaze meets Margaret's. "So were you once," she replies pointedly. You could be again. Margaret doesn't answer immediately. Her mind is still tangled in the call from James, in Walter's accusations. Walter's telling the kids that I've turned vindictive, she says finally. That I'm trying to ruin him. Eleanor scoffs. Walter would say the sun rises in the west if it served his purposes. She squeezes Margaret's arm. Don't let him drag you back into his reality, Maggie. You've just started finding your own. Margaret takes in her friend's words, but she can't shake the feeling of being trapped in the past. Every step forward feels like a struggle, especially with Walter's manipulative tactics still hanging over her like a cloud. But Eleanor's encouragement, however simple, helps Margaret see that maybe it's time to start focusing on her own needs, on herself. The next day, Margaret returns to Patricia's house, the place she's been staying since she moved out of the home she shared with Walter. As she pulls into the driveway, she notices an unfamiliar car parked in front of the house, a sleek black Mercedes with tinted windows. Patricia meets her at the door with a tight-lipped expression. You have a visitor, she says, sounding mildly irritated. I told her she should have called first, but she insisted on waiting. Margaret steps into the living room and finds Natalie, Walter's girlfriend, sitting on the couch. The sight of her in her expensive designer outfit feels jarring, almost out of place in the humble living room. She stands when Margaret enters, smoothing her skirt as she does. Mrs. Jenkins, she begins, then pauses, recalibrating. Margaret, I was hoping we could talk. Patricia, hovering nearby with the protectiveness of a mother figure, says, I'll be in the kitchen if you need me, before retreating. Margaret sits across from Natalie, trying not to feel the awkwardness of their encounter. She doesn't trust Natalie or her motives, but she's not one to shy away from uncomfortable conversations. Natalie hesitates before speaking. I never intended for things to happen the way they did at your anniversary party, she says. That was Walter's idea, and I realize now it was cruel. The words hang in the air, and Margaret searches Natalie's face, wondering if she's being sincere or simply trying to cover her tracks. What do you want, Natalie? Margaret asks bluntly. Natalie leans forward slightly. Walter is becoming difficult, she admits, her eyes flickering with a mix of concern and self-preservation. He's angry about the financial discoveries your attorney made. He feels cornered. He's talking about fighting you all the way to the state Supreme Court if necessary. Margaret raises an eyebrow. That would be expensive, she says dryly. And ultimately futile, given the documentation we have. I know, Natalie says quickly, sensing Margaret's resistance. That's why I'm here. I was hoping I could convince you to consider a reasonable settlement. Something that would allow everyone to move forward without years of legal battles. Margaret can't help but scoff. Walter has sent his mistress to negotiate on his behalf, as if her youth and beauty might sway Margaret where legal arguments and financial facts couldn't. And what does Walter consider reasonable? Margaret asks, keeping her voice neutral, though her mind is already working through the absurdity of the situation. He's prepared to offer 40% of the disclosed marital assets, Natalie says, including the Newport cottage. Margaret's mind sharpens. And the beach house in Westerly? The one purchased with marital funds but hidden? Or my father's inheritance that Walter invested without my knowledge? Natalie falters for a moment, surprised by the specificity of Margaret's question, but quickly regains her composure. I'm not familiar with all the details, she says carefully. But Walter is offering a fair settlement. He believes 40% is more than generous. Margaret stands, signaling that the conversation is over. Please tell Walter that all settlement discussions should go through our attorneys. Charlotte Evans has my complete confidence. Natalie looks at Margaret, her composure slipping. He won't stop, you know. When Walter sets his mind on something, he becomes obsessive. This could drag on for years. Margaret feels a strange sense of clarity. I have time, she says simply. And the law is on my side. As Natalie leaves, Patricia emerges from the kitchen, 2 glasses of wine in hand. Well, that took nerve, she says, handing Margaret one of the glasses. Walter sending his mistress to do his dirty work. Margaret sinks onto the sofa, suddenly exhausted by the weight of it all. He's getting desperate. Charlotte has uncovered too much for him to maintain the fiction that he's been honest about our finances. Patricia sits beside her. "What will you do?" she asks, her voice filled with genuine concern. Margaret takes a sip of wine, thinking about everything she's been through. "I'll keep moving forward," she says, her voice steady. "One day at a time. Let Charlotte handle the legal aspects. And I'll keep focusing on my writing, on rediscovering the pieces of myself that I've set aside for too long." 2 days later, Margaret's world shifts again when she receives an urgent call from Charlotte, her divorce attorney. Charlotte's voice is brisk but sympathetic, carrying a hint of something else, something Margaret can't quite place. "Walter's attorney has requested an urgent meeting," Charlotte explains without preamble. "Apparently, they have a good faith settlement offer they want to present in person." Margaret can't suppress a laugh. "You had a visit from the girlfriend?" she asks dryly. "Is that what they've resorted to now?" Charlotte sounds both surprised and grimly amused. "That's a new tactic. What did she offer?" 40% of the disclosed marital assets, including the Newport cottage," Margaret replies, rolling her eyes. "It's insulting, considering what we now know." Charlotte makes a dismissive noise. "Insulting, yes, but this meeting request comes directly from Gregory Palmer, and he's smart enough not to waste our time with lowball offers. Shall I schedule it for tomorrow morning?" Margaret hesitates, her mind turning over the possibility that Walter's team is finally starting to feel the pressure. She agrees to meet, though she feels a deep sense of wariness. If Walter is finally making concessions, it must be because his back is against the wall. The man who once controlled every aspect of their life together was now scrambling to control the narrative of their divorce. But Margaret isn't fooled. The game isn't over. The next morning, Margaret drives to downtown Providence with Charlotte. The office building they enter is imposing, a towering glass structure that screams success and power. The sleek, modern lobby is filled with marble floors and glass walls, a space meant to convey confidence, if not dominance. Gregory Palmer, a senior attorney at Palmer Whitmore and Associates, greets them with a firm handshake and a polite, almost professional smile. He leads them into a conference room where Walter, impeccably dressed in one of his famous court suits, is already waiting. His expression is carefully neutral, but Margaret can see the tension in his jaw and the slight twitch in his eye. Once they're seated, Gregory Palmer opens the meeting with practiced smoothness. "We appreciate your willingness to discuss settlement options outside of formal court proceedings," he begins. "My client is eager to resolve this matter efficiently and equitably." Charlotte remains professional but skeptical. "We're always open to reasonable solutions provided they acknowledge all marital assets, including those recently discovered." Walter's attorney continues, sliding a folder across the table to both Margaret and Charlotte. "After reviewing the additional information your office provided, we've prepared a comprehensive settlement proposal." Gregory's smile is thin and polite, as though he's doing something noble by making the offer. "You'll find it addresses the concerns you've raised regarding the previously undisclosed assets." Margaret opens the folder, her fingers trembling slightly as she reads the detailed financial breakdown inside. To her surprise, Walter is now offering 60% of the total marital estate, which includes both the Newport cottage and the beach house in Westerly. The offer also includes the return of her father's inheritance and its accumulated growth. Margaret's pulse quickens. It's more than she expected, but it's still far from fair. Charlotte pores over the documents, occasionally making notes in the margins. "This is certainly closer to a reasonable starting point," she says after a long silence. "Though there are several areas that require adjustment, particularly regarding retirement accounts and future income from the firm's ongoing cases." Walter, for the first time in the meeting, speaks, his voice carrying the same carefully modulated authority he once used to address juries. "I believe this offer demonstrates my sincere desire to conclude this unfortunate situation fairly," he says, his eyes briefly meeting Margaret's. Margaret, neither of us benefits from prolonged litigation. Margaret holds his gaze for a long moment, allowing the words to settle between them. What prompted this sudden interest in settlement, Walter? She asks, her voice steady but filled with suspicion. Last I heard, you were considering appeals to the state Supreme Court. What's changed? Walter's expression hardens, and Gregory answers smoothly in his place. My client recognizes the wisdom of focusing on the future rather than prolonging matters that serve neither party's interests. Charlotte closes the folder, the movement deliberate. We'll need time to review this proposal thoroughly, she says, standing. I suggest we schedule a follow-up meeting next week after my client has had the opportunity to consider all aspects. As they prepare to leave, Walter looks at Margaret, his expression shifting from professional detachment to something that hints at personal emotion. Margaret, he says quietly, his voice lower now. May I have a word in private? Charlotte gives Margaret a questioning look, but Margaret nods slightly, signaling that she can handle this on her own. Charlotte and Gregory step into the hallway, leaving Margaret and Walter alone in the conference room. Walter's tone softens when the door closes behind them. You've made your point, he says, his words filled with an unfamiliar respect. You've shown everyone that you won't be dismissed or overlooked. Margaret remains silent, watching him closely. She doesn't trust him, not after everything he's done. But there's a part of her that's still holding on to the history of their relationship, a history that's been difficult to shake, even after the betrayal. This offer is more than fair, Walter presses. You could live very comfortably for the rest of your life. Travel, pursue whatever interests you've developed suddenly. Margaret's gaze sharpens. Why the change of heart, Walter? You sent Natalie to offer me 40% 2 days ago. Now you're proposing 60%, plus the beach house. What's different? Walter's jaw tightens, the only sign of his frustration slipping through his composed facade. Several of my partners are concerned about the firm's reputation, he admits after a long pause. If details of our financial arrangements become public record through prolonged divorce proceedings, it could jeopardize the firm. They've encouraged me to resolve this quickly. Margaret, still calm, nods slowly. Not a change of heart, then. Just external pressure. Your partners are worried about their own reputations, and now they're forcing you to offer me a more reasonable settlement. Walter looks at her for a long moment, as if seeing her for the first time, the familiar image of Margaret, the wife who always put him first, starting to crumble. He opens his mouth to say something, but Margaret interrupts. There's still more that needs to be done, she says firmly. Charlotte will let you know when we're ready to move forward. Walter stands, his frustration now palpable. What more do you want, Margaret? He demands, his voice cracking with a mix of anger and exhaustion. You've already damaged my standing with the firm, ruined my reputation in the community. What else do you need? Margaret takes a deep breath, feeling the weight of his words. But she knows, with absolute certainty, that this moment isn't about him anymore. I didn't do those things, Walter, she says quietly, meeting his gaze head-on. You did. When you lied about our finances, when you humiliated me publicly at our anniversary party. Every consequence you're facing is the direct result of your own actions. Walter stares at her, as though seeing someone unfamiliar. The Margaret he thought he knew, who had always been there, quietly supportive, willing to forgive and forget, is slipping away, replaced by a woman who is finding her voice, her strength. For the first time in years, Walter seems lost for words. Margaret turns to leave, gathering her things. Before she walks out the door, she stops and glances at him. We built a life together, Walter. 50 years, she says softly, the grief of their shared history still lingering in her voice. Does that count for nothing now? Walter doesn't answer. He watches her go, perhaps finally realizing that the person he thought he controlled had found a way to free herself. A few days after her private meeting with Walter, Margaret begins to process everything she's learned. She's in the middle of the settlement negotiations, but she still can't shake the underlying tension in her mind. Her feelings about Walter are complicated. There's anger, betrayal, and beneath it all, the grief of a marriage that had once been full of promise, now reduced to a battle over assets and dignity. Margaret's phone buzzes with a message from Charlotte. Walter's team is insisting we meet again, and I believe this time they're prepared to finalize the terms. Gregory Palmer has mentioned that the pressure from his partners has increased. I think it's time we push for more, especially with the retirement funds. Margaret lets out a sigh, the weight of the divorce still heavy on her shoulders. Despite the shifts in the negotiations, it all feels so final, so irreversible. Walter's new family, Natalie's pregnancy, everything seems to symbolize the new life he's building for himself, while Margaret feels as though she's still piecing her own life together from the wreckage of the old one. She drives to the office the next morning, her mind wandering back to the writing group she's become a part of. That small community of writers has become a refuge for her, a place where she can escape from the constant legal battles and the heavy emotional toll of the divorce. Eleanor, the outspoken member of the group, has been an especially steadfast ally. Eleanor has encouraged Margaret to keep writing, to embrace the stories she's put aside for decades. And as much as Margaret feels torn between the past and the future, she knows the time for reclaiming her own dreams is now. At the office, the atmosphere is as cold as the building itself. Margaret meets Charlotte in the conference room, and Walter's attorney is already present. Margaret notices that Walter himself isn't there yet. Gregory Palmer looks up as she enters, offering a tight smile. "We appreciate your willingness to meet with us again," he begins, but there's an air of formality that hangs over the meeting. It's clear they're trying to play it cool, but there's an underlying tension. Both sides know that this is the endgame. Walter arrives moments later, his steps deliberate as he walks into the room. He's dressed in his usual impeccable suit, but the edges of his calm composure seem to be fraying. His face is haggard, eyes dark with exhaustion. Despite his bravado, Margaret can see the toll his life is taking on him. His obsession with maintaining control, his need to win at all costs, are slowly consuming him, and now, he seems like a man who is running on fumes. Walter doesn't meet Margaret's eyes at first, but when he does, there's something almost resigned in his gaze. A part of Margaret wonders if he's feeling the weight of their years together, the weight of everything they've both lost. She isn't sure. But at this moment, that is no longer her problem. They go through the settlement offer, which Gregory Palmer presents in painstaking detail. It's far better than the initial 40% offer, and it includes the beach house, the Newport cottage, and perhaps most importantly, the return of her father's inheritance and all accumulated growth. But it's still not enough for Margaret. She can feel it in her bones. Charlotte doesn't hesitate, offering a firm but polite counterproposal. The proposed allocation of retirement funds remains insufficient, she states. Given the financial context we now have, we expect a more equitable distribution. She flips through the documents, making a note on her pad. We also want full consideration of Walter's ongoing earnings and how that will be factored into the final settlement. Walter, his face hardening, leans forward. "I've made more than generous concessions," he says, his voice taking on the authoritative tone that once commanded courtrooms. "This should be the final offer." Margaret can feel the shift in the air, the way Walter's arrogance is still present, even in the face of what he must know is a lost battle. His lawyers exchange glances, but Margaret holds her ground. She knows the game now, understands how to navigate the tactics he's so familiar with. She's no longer his wife, she's his equal across this table, and she will not be manipulated. When the meeting concludes, they agree to reconvene in a few days. As Margaret walks out of the conference room, she feels a slight weight lift from her shoulders. She doesn't know what the outcome will be, but she is learning to let go of the toxic parts of her marriage. She's reclaiming her power, her voice, her life. Back at Patricia's house, Margaret finds herself at a crossroads. Her thoughts drift to the writing group, to the encouragement of Eleanor and Diane, to the memory of the manuscript she once wrote, a children's book that had been put on the shelf for far too long. As she sits down in the quiet of Patricia's guest room, she opens the box of old writing materials, sifting through the pages of her story. The familiar words, the ones that had once given her so much hope, now seem like a lifeline. She's been so consumed by the divorce, by everything Walter has done to her, that she's nearly forgotten who she was before all of this. The woman who believed in stories, in creating worlds with words. Margaret takes a deep breath, and for the first time in years, she feels a surge of excitement about something that isn't related to the battle she's been fighting for her freedom. It's her creative voice, the one she buried under the weight of years of marriage, and it's calling her back. The next morning, Margaret finds herself at the small cafe by the harbor, meeting Diane for coffee. Diane has offered to connect Margaret with her editor friend at Little Harbor Press, and Margaret knows that this is her chance to bring her story back to life. The warmth of the sun and the sound of sailboats gently rocking in the harbor fill the air. There's a lightness in Margaret's heart that she hasn't felt in years. As she explains her story to Diane, about the little girl who can hear flowers speak, a tale she wrote long ago, Diane listens intently. "This is a beautiful story, Maggie. A real one," Diane says, her voice full of sincerity. "I think it could resonate with a lot of people. Children, especially, need stories like this one." Margaret smiles, feeling a rush of gratitude. "I never thought it could go anywhere. It was just something I wrote, before everything changed." "Everything didn't change, Maggie. You just forgot what mattered," Diane says softly. "But now you're finding it again." Margaret's life begins to shift in small but profound ways. She finalizes the details of her settlement, securing a fair deal that will allow her to move forward with the financial stability she needs. But it's the moments of quiet joy, working on her manuscript, meeting with Diane, and even the occasional dinner with Eleanor, that remind her of the woman she was before Walter. A woman with dreams and ambitions of her own. The path ahead isn't without challenges. The divorce, the financial decisions, and the emotional aftermath of betrayal are all still looming. But Margaret is learning that she doesn't have to carry them alone. She's finally putting her own needs first. As she revises her manuscript late one evening, Margaret hears a soft knock at her door. It's James, her son, standing there with a smile. "You've got this," he says, holding up a piece of paper. "The publisher's approval is in. Your manuscript is officially going to print." Margaret feels a swell of emotion. This isn't just about the book, it's about everything she's overcome. The woman who once defined herself through Walter's needs, through the expectations of their life together, is now creating something of her own. It's a small victory, but for Margaret, it's everything. The final pages of the manuscript are completed, and Margaret's world begins to feel like it's opening up again. She's ready for the next chapter of her life, one she'll write entirely on her own terms. It's not perfect. The past will always be a part of her story, but it no longer defines her. The days are now turning into weeks, and Margaret feels a calmness she hasn't known in years. Her new life in Oakage is settling into a routine. The small artsy bungalow she'd found is a reflection of her new self. Quiet, personal, filled with new possibilities and, for the first time in years, her own choices. The house is still a work in progress. Every corner is filled with bits of her own personality. Paintings from local artists, eclectic furniture she carefully picked out, and stacks of books that speak to her soul. Patricia has become her closest friend in this new phase, and the two of them often spend afternoons exploring the local shops, enjoying coffee, and talking about everything and nothing. Margaret has also rekindled her love for writing. Her manuscript, the one she had shelved all those years ago, is now being revised and reworked for publication. Diane has connected her with an editor, and the editor has provided invaluable feedback, making the project feel like something real and tangible. The process is slow, but it's rewarding. With each chapter she rewrites, Margaret feels a deeper sense of accomplishment. She's writing for herself now, not for anyone else's approval. One afternoon, as Margaret is sitting at her desk with a cup of tea, she receives a call from James. She picks up the phone, smiling as she hears his voice. "Mom, I just wanted to check in. How's everything going?" "I'm good, sweetheart," she replies, her voice warm. "I'm finally settling in here. The house feels like home." "I'm glad to hear that," James says, sounding relieved. "I know it's been a tough few months." But I think you're really starting to make this place your own. Margaret nods, though he can't see her. It's a fresh start. For all of us, I think. James pauses for a moment, and then his voice turns a little more serious. I spoke to Dad last night. Margaret's heart lurches slightly at the mention of Walter. She tries not to let her discomfort show. How is he? He's sober. And he seems to be getting better. He mentioned that he's been working on himself. He's actually taking the program seriously. Margaret feels a mixture of relief and something else, an odd sense of peace. She's glad that Walter is taking responsibility for his actions, but there's still so much pain in their past, and part of her wonders if that pain will ever fully go away. That's good to hear, she says quietly. Yeah. He even apologized for everything, James continues. He's been reflecting on a lot of things, about you, about the family. Margaret exhales slowly, pushing the emotions down. Well, it's a little late for apologies, don't you think? I know, James says, his voice gentle. But he's trying, Mom. That counts for something. Margaret doesn't respond immediately. Her mind is a whirl of conflicting emotions, anger, bitterness, a quiet sense of closure. It's hard to sort through them all. It does count, James. But I'm not going to let it change everything. I've worked too hard to get to where I am now. I get it, he replies. I just wanted you to know he's trying. Margaret smiles softly. Thanks, James. I appreciate you keeping me updated. After she hangs up, Margaret sits in silence for a few moments. She thinks about Walter, about everything they once were, about the family they built, and how that has all been torn apart by lies and betrayal. She also thinks about everything she's created since then, her own life, her writing, and the relationships she's rebuilding with her children and friends. She has moved beyond the pain. Not in the sense of erasing it or pretending it never happened, but by taking control of her own narrative. The freedom to make choices for herself, to chase her dreams, and to stand tall in the face of the future. It's all her own now. The next week, Margaret is invited to a small dinner party at Patricia's house. It's an intimate gathering of friends, people Margaret has met since moving to Oakage. The evening is relaxed, filled with laughter, good food, and stimulating conversation. Eleanor is there, along with a few members of the writing group. As they talk about their work, the conversation shifts to the topic of publishing, and Margaret feels a quiet thrill when they ask about her progress with her manuscript. I think I'm close, Margaret says with a smile. It's still a work in progress, but I've made a lot of revisions. I'm hopeful it'll be ready soon. That's incredible, Eleanor says, her eyes bright. I can't wait to see it on the shelves. The conversation moves to other topics. Patricia's upcoming retirement from nursing, the latest local art exhibit, and even some gossip about the neighborhood. But Margaret can't help but feel a sense of pride. For so long, she had been defined by her relationship with Walter. She was the dutiful wife, the supportive partner, the mother of their children. But now she is defined by herself, by her own ambitions, her own desires, her own voice. A few weeks later, Margaret receives an email from the editor at Little Harbor Press. It's official. Her book is going to be published. The excitement that floods her chest is almost overwhelming. The long hours of writing, revising, and doubting are now paying off in the most beautiful way. Her story will soon be out in the world, and she will be a published author. She can hardly believe it. A children's book. A story she wrote decades ago, tucked away in a box, is finally seeing the light of day. That evening, she calls James and Andrea to share the news. Mom, that's amazing. James exclaims over the phone. I'm so proud of you. Andrea, too, expresses her excitement. I can't wait to read it. I always knew you had it in you. Margaret smiles, a tear slipping down her cheek. Thank you, both of you. I couldn't have done this without your support. Weeks pass, and as the release date for her book draws closer, Margaret finds herself even more connected to her new life. The house is fully settled, her writing is taking off, and she feels a sense of peace she never thought possible after everything she'd been through. Her ex-husband, Walter, continues his recovery and slowly begins to rebuild some of the life he nearly destroyed. He's no longer at the center of her world, but she's grateful that he's taking steps to improve himself, for the sake of their children, and perhaps, even for his own sake. But it's not Walter's journey that matters now. It's hers. Margaret Cooper, the woman who had once been buried under the weight of her husband's needs and ambitions, is finally rising to her full potential. And she's not looking back. As she steps into the Oakage Writers' Circle meeting, Margaret is filled with a quiet confidence. Her manuscript has been sent off for the final round of edits, and the excitement surrounding her upcoming book release has sparked something inside her, something that has always been there but was never allowed to shine. She's beginning to see her life for what it is, a collection of stories, some tragic, some beautiful, and all uniquely hers. And now, for the first time in decades, she is finally ready to tell them. As autumn settles over Oakage, the crisp air fills Margaret's lungs with a sense of purpose she hasn't experienced in years. Her book is edging closer to publication, and the writing group's support continues to be a source of encouragement and strength. There's a quiet satisfaction in knowing she's on the cusp of something she's worked for her entire life. But even as the excitement over her publishing journey grows, a sense of uncertainty lingers. Margaret is reminded daily that life is unpredictable, full of changes that can reshape everything in an instant. The story of her new beginning is still unfolding, and sometimes the next chapter feels just out of reach. One afternoon, as Margaret works on her memoir, recounting the painful and transformative journey of her divorce from Walter, her phone buzzes with a message. It's from Charlotte, her attorney, the one who helped guide her through the divorce proceedings with calm professionalism and a steady hand. "We need to talk. Call me when you can." Margaret feels a slight tightening in her chest. Charlotte's messages are never vague, and the tone is direct. Margaret's heart races as she picks up the phone. "Charlotte," she answers. "What's going on?" "Margaret, I don't want to alarm you, but Walter's attorney called today. They're asking for a revision to the settlement agreement," Charlotte says, her voice steady but serious. Apparently, Walter is seeking more financial consideration in exchange for not pursuing any further legal action. Margaret blinks, caught off guard. More? After everything's been finalized? Yes. It seems he's trying to make the case that his assets aren't fully reflected in the settlement, and they want to renegotiate some of the terms, specifically related to the firm's investments and his retirement accounts. Margaret sighs deeply, feeling her patience stretch thin. "I thought we were done with this. I thought it was all settled." "I know, Margaret. Believe me. I thought the same. But this is Walter we're talking about. He doesn't know when to stop." Margaret leans back in her chair, her mind racing. It's as if nothing has changed. Walter has moved on, married Natalie, and even has a child on the way. And yet, here he is, trying to drag her back into his orbit, trying to rewrite their final chapter. "Why now?" Margaret asks, her voice quieter. "Why this sudden push?" Charlotte is silent for a moment. "There's been some rumblings about Walter's firm. The merger talks that he mentioned to you, they've hit some snags. If the firm merges, there's a chance Walter could lose a significant portion of his income, especially given his health issues. I think he's looking for a way to stabilize his financial future, which he probably feels is jeopardized." Margaret feels a strange mix of sympathy and frustration. She had once shared his sense of control, of meticulous planning. But that version of him feels so distant now. And she can't ignore the fact that, despite everything, she still carries the weight of their history together. "Charlotte, I don't want to go back into all of this," she says softly. "I've moved on. I'm building my own life now, and I don't have the energy for another round of negotiations." "I can't do it." Charlotte's voice softens. "I understand, Margaret. I'm not suggesting you should. But this is the situation. We need to decide how to respond. You have every right to refuse, but we'll need to prepare for the possibility of litigation." Margaret feels a flicker of anger rise within her. Why does he have to keep doing this? I've given him everything I could. I honored our marriage, raised our children, supported his career. And now, after everything, he still wants more. Charlotte's words are measured but empathetic. It's not about you, Margaret. It's about Walter's own insecurities and his inability to let go of the past. It's hard for him to accept that he's no longer the center of everything. Margaret sits in silence, staring out the window at the fading light of the evening. The house, her sanctuary, feels both like a symbol of her freedom and a reminder of all that she's had to overcome. But the question of how to respond to Walter's demands looms over her. She wonders if this will ever truly end, or if some part of him will always find a way to reach out, to manipulate, to reclaim control. A week later, Charlotte arranges a meeting with Gregory Palmer, Walter's attorney. Margaret arrives at the law offices of Palmer Whitmore and Associates, feeling a wave of reluctance wash over her as she steps into the imposing glass building. It's almost as if the very structure of the place is a physical representation of the battles she has fought and the walls she's had to build around herself. Inside the conference room, Gregory Palmer is already seated. He greets her with a tight smile, and there's a faint air of cordiality that feels rehearsed. Walter is not present. Margaret notices that his absence feels like a small, yet significant, shift in power. "Margaret, thank you for meeting with us," Gregory says, his voice smooth. "I'm sure you've heard by now that we have some concerns regarding the final settlement." Margaret nods but says nothing. She remains calm, keeping her emotions in check. Gregory continues, sliding a folder across the table toward her. Walter has reviewed the documents and believes that certain aspects of the firm's future financial arrangements were overlooked. He feels this has affected his overall compensation. Margaret scans the documents in front of her, her eyes narrowing as she looks over the numbers. Her patience begins to fray, and her mind drifts to everything she's been through to get to this point. Every sleepless night, every hurtful word, and every moment she's fought for independence. Walter is asking for an additional settlement that would more accurately reflect his future earnings and potential assets, Gregory continues. He's suggesting that if we can come to an agreement, he'll be willing to close the matter without further litigation. Margaret's hand trembles slightly as she folds the papers back. She can feel the anger bubbling up, but she keeps it controlled. "I've moved on from Walter's games. This was settled. I've honored the agreement, and I expect him to do the same." Gregory leans forward, his tone becoming more persuasive. "Margaret, I understand your frustration, but we're not asking for a large adjustment. Just a small consideration to account for Walter's future financial needs." Margaret's eyes meet his. "His needs are no longer my responsibility." Gregory shifts uncomfortably. "Of course. But this is a business matter, Margaret. We are simply asking for a reasonable accommodation." The room feels colder now, and Margaret stands up, her decision made. "I will not entertain further discussions. Walter had every opportunity to settle fairly, and he chose not to. Any future correspondence must go through my attorney, as we agreed." Gregory stands as well, a forced smile on his face. "Very well, Margaret. I will relay your position to Walter. But you must understand, this will not go away easily." Margaret leaves the office without another word. She's exhausted by the constant push and pull of her past life, but she knows, with absolute certainty, that she's done. She won't let him drag her back into the chaos. Not now, not ever. As the weeks go on, Margaret focuses on the things that truly matter. Her writing, her new home, her relationships. The writing group has become a true community for her, and Eleanor continues to be her steadfast friend and mentor. It's in these quiet moments, surrounded by people who see her for who she is now, that Margaret finds her peace. But just when she thinks she can breathe freely, her phone buzzes one evening with a text from James. It's a message that shakes her to her core. "Dad's in the hospital. They think he's had a stroke." Her heart stops for a moment. Despite everything, despite all the hurt and betrayal, she knows, instinctively, that she must go. It's the right thing to do. For her children, for the years of shared history, and for the person she has become. A woman who believes in healing, in forgiveness, and in showing up when it matters most.